Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a truly fascinating case that sounds like something straight out of a sci-fi legal thriller. We're going to look at how a defendant actually used complex network physics and advanced mathematics to fight a serious criminal charge. It's this incredibly rare collision of hard natural science and statutory law. And honestly, it asks a massive question. How do we actually prove cause and effect in the digital age? Let's get right into it.
So the exact charge against the defendant, Dr. Chen Jingwan, was a legal classification known as picking quarrels and provoking trouble. Kind of a broad term, right? But to really grasp this case, you absolutely don't need to be a legal scholar. You just need to understand one key requirement for a conviction, which is causing serious public order chaos. As we're going to see, this exact phrase is the hinge upon which the entire case swings. It is the absolute crux of the whole legal argument.
And right off the bat, we hit the central mystery of the case. The law explicitly requires the prosecution to prove serious public order chaos. But the actual evidence presented in the case documents, it consisted entirely of digital retweets. There was literally zero offline impact, nothing. So we're looking at this stark, wild contrast between a massive society-level theoretical claim and a tiny, purely digital footprint. Okay, here's our game plan for today's Explainer. We'll start with the setup, move through the defendant's three-tiered defense, scientific, legal, and empirical, and wrap up with a really interesting AI consensus.
All right, let's jump right into Section 1, the setup and core charge.
Picture this. According to the case documents, Dr. Chen is arrested at his home simply for retweeting online posts, including some from official accounts like the U.S. Embassy. For doing this, he was sentenced to 1 year and 8 months in prison. The prosecution argued that by retweeting these posts, he knowingly spread false information, which the court concluded caused severe societal disruption. But again, keep your eye on the ball here. Did a few retweets actually cause serious public chaos?
To really appreciate the defense's genius, we need to talk about a legal concept called a result crime. In penal codes, certain actions are only considered criminal if they result in a specific, measurable, real-world consequence. Think of it like this. If I speed on an empty highway, that's a behavioral crime. The act itself is just illegal. But a result crime demands proof of the aftermath. Without concrete proof of serious chaos, the crime legally just doesn't exist. The consequence isn't an add-on, it's the fundamental threshold for guilt.
Which brings us to Section 2, Tier 1, the scientific defense.
The defense started by pointing out a beautifully simple metric. Dr. Chen had fewer than 100 followers. That's it. In network science, this makes his account a highly marginal peripheral node. Because his audience was so incredibly small, the mathematical transmission rate, what epidemiologists would call the R0, was far, far less than 1.
And because that transmission rate was less than 1, the defense pulled out the big guns, the Galton-Watson extinction theorem. Don't let the name intimidate you. This theorem proves mathematically that in a subcritical state, disturbances naturally die out. Basically, the spark just fizzles. It is fundamentally mathematically impossible for such a marginal node to trigger a cascading butterfly effect or some system-wide avalanche. The signal just naturally fades into the background noise.
They didn't stop there. The defense also referenced the CAP theorem and scale-free networks. In everyday terms, these principles prove that the inherent structure of a decentralized network absolutely prevents a single, isolated, low-follower node from forcing a massive, system-wide reaction. So, scientifically speaking, drawing a causal link between a few retweets and serious public chaos is just, well, it's physically impossible.
Let's move on to Section 3, Tier 2, the jurisprudential clash.
The defense noted that there are actual explicit guidelines for this exact charge. To stop arbitrary rulings, the Supreme Court established hard quantitative thresholds. For a digital post to legally be considered disruptive, it generally needs 500 or more retweets, 5,000 or more views, or direct proof of real-world offline disruption, like actual public panic or gatherings. The engagement on Dr. Chen's retweets fell totally short of these explicit numbers, which legally invalidates the charge based on the statute itself.
So the crazy part identified by the defense is this massive logical leap. The court acknowledged Step 1, the retweet, and then they jumped directly to Step 3, the legal conviction. Actually, wait, they completely skipped Step 2. The factual evidence of chaos was nowhere to be found. They basically just took the legal label of chaos and slapped it on the case, instead of requiring actual evidence.
Now, you might be wondering, what if, by some freak miracle, a butterfly effect actually did happen? Well, the defense anticipated that exact counter-argument. They pointed to Article 16 of the criminal law. This dictates that if a resulting harm is completely unforeseeable and not a result of direct intent or negligence, it is legally considered an accident, not a crime. To a tiny marginal node in a massive network, a system-wide collapse is entirely unforeseeable.
All right, moving into Section 4, Tier 3, the post-release empirical proof.
Let's do a quick reality check and compare the theoretical danger claimed by the court against empirical reality. The court predicted macro-level chaos, right? Yet, when Dr. Chen was released over a year later, his posts were completely untouched. Crickets. 0 new interactions, 0 shares, 0 offline impact. It perfectly highlights this massive, glaring disconnect between the legal ruling and reality.
The defense presented this as the ultimate natural experiment. This zero-effect observation serves as cold, hard empirical proof that the predicted serious chaos literally never materialized in the real world. The posts existed in a total vacuum, completely validating those complex scientific and mathematical models they presented back in Tier 1.
Finally, let's wrap up with Section 5, the AI consensus and element nullification.
This part is super interesting. When 6 different advanced AI models reviewed the legal documents of this case, their findings were incredibly uniform. ChatGPT called it an emptying of elements. Copilot and DeepSeek noted that legal labels were substituted for actual results. Grok and Quen pointed out the massive causal disconnect. Literally every single model independently concluded that standard evidence rules were structurally bypassed by the court.
So, the overarching consensus from the source analyses is unified. The models agreed that the required legal element was basically emptied or nullified. By treating a true result crime as a mere behavioral crime, the necessity of actually proving real societal chaos was structurally ignored. The court swapped out hard evidence for a legal label, even though the defendant's scientific and empirical defense had completely dismantled the causal link from top to bottom.
Which leaves us with a pretty profound question about the future of jurisprudence in our highly networked world. When the absolute mathematical laws of physics and network science directly collide with the interpretive boundaries of the penal code, which reality takes precedence? I mean, if an event is scientifically impossible, can it still be legally true? It's a fascinating dilemma to ponder. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and I really hope this deep dive gave you a powerful new perspective on what happens when science and the law go head-to-head. See you next time.